Stem teas are a great way to enjoy the flavor of green teas without as much caffeine, and the Kukicha Osada is a fantastic stem tea from Shizuoka. In this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about this stem tea and also visiting the farm that it was grown on. Let's get started. Most Japanese green teas are made from the leaves of the tea plant. The two most popular types of green teas in Japan are sencha, which is made from the young leaves on top of the tea plant, and bancha, which is made from the older leaves lower down on the tea plant. The stems used to be removed and discarded from teas, as it was thought to provide no benefits. Then a few farmers began brewing the stems to make teas for themselves to enjoy. Because the farmers had to sell all the tea leaves that they produced, they couldn't afford to drink their own tea. Stem teas originally emerged as a way for farmers to experience the teas they were growing, but soon other people began to take note of them. These teas became known as Kukicha, or stem tea. The stems and leaves provide very different flavors in green teas. The leaves have these sweet, steamed vegetable, and even savory flavors, while the stems lean more on these straw, summer grass, and floral taste profiles. The stems also contain 1/3 the caffeine compared to the leaves, and they even contain more minerals. This minerality can be felt as a tingling sensation on the palate, and it really adds a new dimension to the taste. This led to experimentation amongst tea producers, with some using half stems, half leaves, and others using mostly stems. The stems used to be removed by hand, but as tea production has become more industrialized, it can now be done by machine. This machine at a tea production facility in Shizuoka is removing the stems from the tea leaves and putting them into a separate bin to be used in stem teas. What makes the Kukicha Osada unique has to do with where it is produced. Up in the mountains of Shizuoka, the tea plants are grown in very rocky soil, which can have an impact on the flavor.
So here we are in a mountain field of the farm Osada, and what is particular here, what you can see as well, is when we were at Mr. Sakamoto or also in Yakushima, we had a lot of earth and crops mixed with earth, but here the ground is really stony, so you really can see that this is a mountain plantation, mountain hill plantation, a lot of stones, meaning also a lot of minerals going into the earth, into the ground, but it's just a different way how also to nourish the ground, especially for this area here, which is higher up in the mountain.
This rocky soil really enhances the minerality of this tea, giving it a unique flavor profile. The tea is grown in the so-called organic village of Isagawa, where a group of smaller farmers have banded together and agreed not to use pesticides or chemicals on their tea fields. This is important because even if one farmer doesn't use chemicals on their tea field, it can still spill over from neighboring fields. By working together, the farmers of Isagawa are able to grow excellent quality green teas without harming the natural ecosystem. Of course, it's great to know that this tea was produced using sustainable methods, but how does it taste? For that, we'll have to do a quick tasting of the tea and see what kind of flavors we notice. Let's get started. Okay, so here we have the Kukicha Osada. So this is a stem tea from Shizuoka. And what you'll notice by looking at the leaves is it's actually very different from teas we've seen in the past because it's a mix of stems and leaves. So I would say it's a ratio of about 50% stems, 50% leaves. We've seen stem teas in the past that have had, either way more stems than leaves or way more leaves than stems. So this is just something I thought was worth pointing out. But let's go ahead and brew this up. So I have 5 grams loaded into the Kyusu, and I'm going to be using a little bit higher of a temperature for this tea because the stems can actually stand up to hotter temperatures than the leaves. So we're going to be using 70 degrees Celsius, about 150 milliliters of water, maybe a little bit less because I'm trying to concentrate the flavor a little bit to get a good tasting. So we're going to be brewing these for 1 minute and we'll be right back. Okay, so if we take a look at the color here, it's definitely kind of on that golden color palette, maybe a little bit more orangish nearly than a typical sencha tea. And I would actually say that the color is a little bit cloudier as well. So it's almost a little bit more pastel, a little bit cloudier. Let's go ahead and have a quick sip of this tea. Very nice. So it's got that kind of light hay or straw note to it, a little bit of fruitiness to it. I'll try to dive a little bit deeper into that. So the fruitiness is interesting. It's a little bit like strawberry, but not quite there. It's just this very kind of sweet, almost concentrated fruitiness that I get from this tea. The fruitiness is something that I notice in stem teas in general, depending on how they're grown, how they're produced. But it's definitely prevalent here. Usually I find that stem teas either go more in the floral direction or more in the fruity direction. And this one, at least in this brewing, is starting to go into that fruity direction. So the addition of the stems, the fact that it's 50% stems and 50% leaves rather than 100% leaves, really kind of takes away these sweet, savory flavors that you get with a sencha or a gyokuro. So it's really much more mild in comparison to a leaf tea or a typical leaf tea. It kind of has this kind of mild straw note, a little bit thinner, I would say, overall than a typical sencha. Yeah, but the flavor is quite nice. So it's very light, very drinkable. If you're kind of later in the afternoon and you're a little more sensitive to caffeine, you don't want to be kept up all night, this is definitely a good tea to have around because you can just really kind of drink it into the afternoon and it's not too heavy on the flavor and it's not too heavy on the caffeine. So just something nice to enjoy in the afternoon or evening. But let's actually brew this tea a second time because sometimes the second brewing of a stem tea really surprises you in terms of how much flavor there is. So you still see that cloudy kind of consistency, maybe even a little bit more so in the second brewing, but it still maintains that same color, that kind of luminescent gold color, maybe a little bit less orange than it was before. So let's go ahead and taste this. Yeah, it's drifting much more into the floral direction. This is actually why I wanted to brew this tea a second time, because I noticed in the second infusion it really picks up this floral characteristic. Let's actually go ahead and take a sniff of the leaves. You're definitely getting that kind of flowery aroma coming from the wet leaves, which is really quite interesting, and it kind of gives you more kind of anchoring into these tasty notes that you get in the second infusion. Yeah, a little bit more flowery, a little bit more mild. You're starting to get more minerality with this tea, which is already kind of got a lot of minerality to begin with. But this is very nice. I'm glad I brewed it a second time. So definitely don't throw these tea leaves out after one brewing. In general, you should try to reuse them until you no longer like the flavor, but particularly with this tea because it really kind of does a right-hand turn on the flavor. So the first brewing was a little bit fruitier, and the second brewing is a little bit more floral. So thank you all so much for joining us on this tasting. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to pick up the Kukicha Osada, you can find that on our website, nioteas.com. And if you have any questions about Kukicha or green tea in general, please feel free to leave those in the comments below, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.